I'm with TechSoup. TechSoup Global is a nonprofit technology organization. We're based in San Francisco. We were formerly known as Compumenter. We've been around since 1987. We started connecting volunteers with nonprofits to do hands-on tech assistance, and now we are a global organization with in 35 countries with many partner affiliates, and our mission is we're working toward the day when every nonprofit and NGO on the planet has the technology tools they need to better achieve their missions. We do that through three-pronged, we have many programs, but a mainly three-pronged approach, which is our main program is the product distribution service, where nonprofits partner with corporate vendor partners like Microsoft, Cisco, Symantec, Adobe, and get those corporate, I'm hearing another speaker. Is that coming in through the speakers?
I think it's coming from behind us.
Oh, okay. So the donor partners, sorry, that was distracting, give us the product and we pass on the donation to the nonprofit. The second way is through campaigns and education, and the last way that we help nonprofits with their tech is the part that I organize, which is the community and social media program. Our team's basic mission is to connect nonprofits with each other. So we really tell that story, and we help nonprofits connect with each other. We help our donor partners amplify their message out to the broader sector, and we connect our global partners, our entire program, and help amplify their message to our constituents. We do that through campaigns, tweet chats, all of the ways that you would imagine, like the social networks that you would imagine, and a large message board, which is how I started that program. I've been at TechSoup since 2000, and that's me.
Hi, I'm Courtney Roberts. I'm a knowledge management and economic development expert. I'm independent, but today I'm here on behalf of Dexis Consulting Group. It's a small consulting firm that works on public-private partnerships for international development and a number of other issues. But the thing that I'm here to speak with you about today is Dexis's role helping U.S. Agency for International Development create an online community to bring together private sector and public sector actors in this convergence between donors and private sector interests. Usually it's corporate social responsibility arms or sort of social responsible supply chain divisions of corporations working to further their goals, and donors looking to work on solving problems by mobilizing capital and innovation that they don't use through the programs that they fund through regular implementation. And what I'd like to just mention is in the public sector, because of new technologies, you're seeing, I've certainly seen over the course of my 15 years working in development, a real change in perspective from kind of the dissemination model of communications to a much more reciprocity-based approach to building a community and extracting the knowledge from the participants, and actually having the actors who want to solve a problem be the convener of people from all over the world and network them to work together to mobilize capital and solve problems. So it's a really exciting time in international development, and hopefully today we'll be able to talk about how technology is helping to solve the coordination problem that you find in dispersed groups of people that are trying to solve the same kinds of problems.
So Rich Robbins, I come from a very different background. I'm more from the for-profit sector. Right now I'm the Vice President and Senior Digital Strategist at MWW Group, which is a leading independent PR firm, and I head up the digital team. We work with our clients, which are both for-profit and non-profit clients, just really helping them understand the new world of communications. And as Courtney was saying, the world of communications really is transformed just completely, a complete transformation in the past few years. from what she calls the dissemination to the collaboration model, or as I say, it's really just from one-way communications where large brands or large governments or nonprofits really controlled the message and were able to spend over $1 billion a year in some cases just pushing out a very controlled message to this new world where pushing out a message no longer works. People don't hear that message, they don't believe it, the credibility is gone, and people are getting their news from each other, they're trusting their friends, they're just not trusting advertising, they're not trusting the mainstream media. And so we're helping our clients navigate this new world. I've been at this firm for a few months. Prior to this, I was at AT&T, and I had done work both partnering AT&T with the nonprofit sector. I did a big partnership with the nonprofit group Rock the Vote before the '08 election, and then worked in the public affairs group, helping AT&T's public affairs as well as the overall corporation really understand this new space and figure out the best ways for AT&T to reposition itself really from this one-way to a two-way dialogue in social media.
Great. Hi. So I'm James Slezak. I head up sustainability and business strategy at Purpose. Purpose.com is a relatively new agency. It's kind of a fairly unique group. It grew out of some work that a number of us did back in 2004 around the US presidential elections, where we started an independent campaign group called the Band of Sisters. It was a 527 group, and we were basically doing online organizing. We crowdfunded several millions of dollars from small dollar donors around the country and some larger donors to get a progressive social change message out into the community. At the time, that was a relatively new model of social organizing, and we were just experimenting with it. The conventional wisdom was sort of that this is something that uniquely applied to political environments and in particular to the United States. But being a foreigner from Australia, you might have guessed from the accent, we felt that actually this was something more powerful than that, and that it would potentially apply more broadly. So although my background's originally in the sciences, a couple of friends that I work with, and I was working on my PhD in physics at the time, my co-founders of that group continued doing that kind of work on a consulting basis for a range of big non-profits, groups like Lance Armstrong Foundation, Al Gore's Climate Change Group and others, and turned that into what's now Purpose.com, the agency. So there's about 40 or 50 of us. We have a hybrid for-profit, non-profit structure. We do a bunch of work in that original vein of founding and incubating new social movements, leveraging technology to aggregate very large numbers of people around the world. So some of the founders of our group founded groups like Get Up in Australia. I was a bit involved in that. And avaz.org. Many of you may have heard of that. It's now the world's largest online social movement. It's just about to tick over to 10 million members now. So we do that work now with clients. We do it starting our own new non-profit ventures, and increasingly we're looking at ways of building new social businesses around that toolkit of online mass mobilization, using social media, but also just using plain old things like email. So happy to be here, and apologies for being a couple minutes late. Glad I'm on the end.
Hi, and my name is Teresa Puente. I'll be your moderator. Since we started late, we thought we'd just jump into having each panelist introduce themselves. Just for my background, I'm a visiting professor this fall in the Graduate School of Journalism. I've been a journalist for over 20 years at mostly newspapers, Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times, and I also teach a course here this semester called Social Media for Journalists. So I'll just start with a couple questions, but we really do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions as well. So I'll just ask a few, and then we'll get right to your questions. So you all have a variety of different backgrounds, working from private, nonprofit, governmental, international issues, politics. So now that we've heard a little bit about what you do, can you give us, to each of you, tell us a little bit about who are the different stakeholders that you're trying to engage, and some examples of projects that you've done it, like some specifics of projects where you've engaged different stakeholders. We'll start with Susan.
So the stakeholders that we're generally engaging are, well, it's recently grown to our global network, so our global capacity building nonprofits that do kind of what we do. We actually, when I say we, I mean my team, because my team has a broader reach than many other facets of our organization. But there's volunteers, there's tech assistants who want to do good. There's nonprofit staff members who want their technology questions answered. There are nonprofit IT guys, basically, and foundations. We recently actually, I don't even know if we've publicly launched yet, but I can talk about it because we have a Twitter account. NGO Source, we recently started a new program called NGO Source, which is a program that vets, it's for foundations so that they can give money to international NGOs. So in the same way that TechSoup vets real nonprofits, like if a person says they're a nonprofit, we vet that they are so that they can get the product donation, that they not only have a 501c3, but they meet all of the qualifications. NGO Source will do that for the foundation world internationally. So that's the newest program, so global NGOs, global foundations. And then there's this whole other level of community members who just are interested in emerging technology for social benefit. So people who are interested in organizations like Kiva that you mentioned earlier, or Salma Source. An example of how we leveraged technology with them. So an example that I'm thinking of right now is one that's on the top of my mind because we're about to kick off this campaign. It's the third year I've done the campaign, which is the Digital Storytelling Initiative. That was a campaign that I launched 3 years ago in order to do a few things. One, to show that you can have a challenge, a contest over multiple platforms, that you can decentralize through social media. You can decentralize a contest so that you can meet people where they're at if they hang out in Facebook or on Twitter, for example. Secondly, to show nonprofits how to tell their story in an engaging way. So many nonprofits have a two-dimensional brochureware 1998 website, and they don't understand how to tell their story. Communications and social media don't even occur to them. So to show them how to tell their story in an engaging way, to show them how to make it shareable, which is essential, so that, you know, it's the whole thing of if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? If you have 7 Twitter followers and you make this great story, nobody cares, only those 7 people, and maybe you. So it's to show them how to socially share their story, to connect with other nonprofits. So that was that's a campaign that I recently engaged most of the communities that we're working with, and it's about to launch. And through, the most important thing being, through a unified hashtag. So showing nonprofits how to use hashtags as a way to create community. 2 examples of that, I'm going to try not to be too long-winded, is that you can serendipitously search for other people in your subsector through a hashtag. So we made the hashtag several years ago NPTech, and that became for nonprofit technology, which is our subsector of the nonprofit sector, and that became a widely used hashtag. So now if I go to various sites around the web, like Delicious, Flickr, YouTube, I look for NPTech. There are NPTech groups all across the social web. We did the same thing with TS Digs, which was the TechSoup digital storytelling hashtag. So we wanted to show that the hashtag can create community. If you use that hashtag uniformly across sites, you can create community between events. So that after the campaign is over, people are still tweeting with that hashtag. You're using your third-party Twitter client like Hootsuite, TweetDeck, CoTweet, and you have that as an ongoing column. You're constantly searching on that hashtag. You have your Google alert set to it. You've created a community around a hashtag. So that was another way that I've engaged across communities using technology. Sure.
Yeah, because I'm here talking about the online community that I'm working with U.S. Agency for International Development with, and it's not yet launched. It'll be a little shorter. But what I wanted to just explain was where I'm working is in the convergence between private sector interests for international development and public sector interests, so donors and companies like Cargill, who wants to help create a new market for their products by doing something that has also some good, or that wants to have a look at more socially responsible ways to implement their supply chain by partnering with firms from developing countries. And other examples that you, I'm sure, know about in other sectors. Also, sometimes companies are just doing philanthropic activities through corporate social responsibility arms, and donors like U.S. Agency for National Development and others like DFID in the UK or the World Bank Group, they want to also run programs, sometimes as simple as like hand washing initiatives in the health sector, may be sponsored by a company that has nothing to do with health or hand washing, but they just want to do it to kind of get their name out there as doing good. So this is sort of the immediate audience, the donors and the private sector or companies who want to play in the space for whatever reason. But there's also a whole host of other people involved in developing partnerships for global development. There are intermediary organizations like the International Business Leadership Forum, Business Call to Action. There are people in academia, either who are involved in research or in networks between developed country and developing country universities. There also are professionals who actually negotiate partnerships. Typically, these are people who are paid by either the private sector or the public sector to convene and identify interests that are shared. So my audience for the work that I'm doing in online community building is really the whole global development audience, but specifically where public and private sector interests intersect. And what we're doing is we're actually building an online community through a public-private partnership. So it's not going to be the typical USAID funds a project, gets a contractor to implement the online community, and then when it gets tired of funding it, it goes away. It's actually a space where there's an existing private sector firm that has an online product, and we're very close to signing the MOU, so I can't actually formally announce who it is. But but they are building this community because they see a profit motive because of the convergence between public and private sector interests. Their goal is to be the Bloomberg of international development and to kind of provide the information on the organizations that are involved in the space, who's involved, what they're involved in, and to really function in this shared value arena, creating value for themselves and creating value for the people they're helping to bring together through networking and knowledge sharing. So the tools that we'll use are social media tools, also online networking functionality that you can find in a number of different technology platforms out there, and some of the traditional knowledge sharing mechanisms as well, products that focus on topically based webinars and online training. And so it's a whole host of demand-driven content and features and functionality. But what the real promise is, we know, is the actual community participation that we hope to get. And the reason we're excited about this is because this activity is happening through a public-private partnership. It will actually be something that will evolve in a viable way rather than something that's planned. It will happen from the perspective of the collaboration that occurs within the community. So if the right people come to the table, it will evolve how that community group wants to see it evolve. And as this shared value space evolves, the online community also will evolve. So it's a little bit vague because we haven't launched, but stay tuned and look for us at the beginning of 2012. But what the exciting thing is that we've got all the constituencies already talking about this among each other, and a whole host of business requirements that we've gathered from the community where this online community is really demanded. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Great. So, and when you look at the question of how do you engage with key stakeholders, this is something we do a lot of advising to our clients, and a lot of our clients or prospective clients are still in the old world of they developed their career in the world where they could push out the message. And their take is, okay, we're doing our print advertising, we're doing radio, TV, outdoor advertising, and it's all just a way of pushing out a message. And they kind of see Facebook as, yeah, let's check the Facebook box, and we want to do the same thing. We want to use Facebook to push out our message. And so a lot of what we're doing is really just helping educate them and saying, it's just a whole different sphere here, and you need to approach it in a completely different way. What I often do is I use my cocktail party analogy, which is if you walk into a cocktail party, you don't walk in and pick up a glass, say, "Hi, I'm here. I'm from AT&T, and I want to shout at you and tell you about our new product." Or I'm from Colgate, and we have a new tube of toothpaste, and I want to tell you about it. You walk into a cocktail party, and you get a sense of the room. You might walk up to a few people, listen, have a general icebreaker, talk about your kids, talk about the weather. Maybe they ask you what you do, and at that point you could start engaging with them. And the big key especially for for-profit companies is being relevant and really connecting with your audience in a way that you are engaging, and that in a way where your consumers, whomever your key stakeholders might be, want to talk to you, they want to listen to you, they want to hear more about what you have to say, and even more importantly, they want to promote your message. And I think that's an area where, like my example with AT&T, if you're doing something like partnering with Rock the Vote, you're striking a chord. You're becoming relevant for either your consumer or whomever your stakeholder might be, and you're doing it in a way that they're not becoming a salesperson for you and pushing your latest bar of soap. They're becoming a brand advocate where they're talking about ways that your company is relevant to their lives. And if you can do that, then you become part of the conversation, and then you're really engaging with your consumer. And then at that point, if they're going to a store and they think, wow, this bar of soap is more than just a bar of soap, it's also a company that really gets behind my community and does things that I value and that I care about, then when they're making that decision, they'll think, yeah, I want to go with your brand because they're doing relevant work to my community, they're supporting whatever social enterprise, or they're helping me, so I'll help them back. And I see that as the most important just difference in this new world of communications, where companies really need to be relevant. They need to be giving back as a way of connecting with their consumers.
Yeah, I guess the way a lot of our work approaches stakeholders, it's definitely similar to a lot of the thinking that the other panelists here have been discussing. But basically, the lens we take is that we try to identify sources of concentrated, unaccountable power and create new entities, new movement organizations that are able to challenge them or provide some counterbalance. So probably the best example of that would be really the first sustainable movement that we did, the first kind of ongoing organization we built back in Australia called GetUp, which looks a lot like MoveOn.org here in the US. It's positioned a little bit less in one of the major political parties' camps. It's a little bit more non-partisan, but still very aggressive on its messaging. And the way that it approaches creating this counterbalance to power, it basically came to life in 2005 when the previous Conservative government had control of both houses of Parliament. And this left a lot of people feeling really disenfranchised because there was really no effective opposition. There was no way to stop the government from enacting a legislative agenda that a lot of people had issues with, pushing back on a bunch of successes around sustainability, human rights, and the treatment of refugees, etc. So just to give you a couple of examples of how we kind of leverage this growing community that we grow. Basically, the pressure points that we pick, they're often government, so they're often about policy aims, of the government and legislation. But often there are other agencies or branches of government that we focus on. So GetUp ran an incredibly successful campaign last year focused on the High Court, and it actually crowdfunded a High Court challenge to a set of laws that was passed by the previous government that disenfranchised a lot of young voters for what a lot of people felt were really illegitimate reasons. It was a potentially very expensive exercise. If we'd lost, the government would have been able to get awarded costs against the organisation. But the members really stepped up. This was taken to the members. They were asked if they wanted to support this. In overwhelming numbers they did. They funded this High Court case, found a test case person to run the case around, and eventually were victorious. It was this sort of record setting court case where the High Court sat around the clock because it was in the context of an election just having been called, and it was very timely. So they literally changed the constitution in Australia as a result of that. They found an implied right to vote, which you might think is kind of already in the constitution. Turned out it wasn't, but they found it there. And so that was kind of an example of creating, I guess, a new source of power and using it where we were able to find a leverage point in the existing universe of institutions. So other typical targets include like big corporations. We've run campaigns to reform the behaviour of large businesses that we felt were not doing the right thing, and really any other source of concentrated power that we can counterbalance by giving people a platform to come together and hold them accountable.
Why don't we take a question or two from the audience just to mix it up? Yes, sir.
I can catch this. Yeah.
I think we all want this one.
Yeah. No, I'll start out, brother. Okay. So basically, people ask that all the time at conferences, like, oh, that sounds really overwhelming. And what I always like when I start talking about the different tools that we use, but what I always like to give examples. There are examples of nonprofits that are small, and nonprofit social entrepreneurship, it doesn't really matter because ultimately the goal is conversion. How you define conversion will depend. Does it mean buying something, or does it mean getting volunteers, or does it mean getting members? On both sides, you want to get members, you want people to amplify your message so that you can get funding dollars or better achieve your mission or consumer dollars. So same purpose. The way that it relates to the small 2-person startup or the small 3-person staff nonprofit with a $100,000 budget or $50,000 budget or volunteer run with no budget is that these tools, if you can get access to if you are listening, you will have access to larger networks and larger conversations. So the hashtag example. So all of a sudden, rather than your 2-person nonprofit with barely any followers on Twitter and a small website with not a lot of reach, has access to a much broader community because of these tools. You start listening into the right hashtags, you start becoming part of these circles and networks. I'm thinking about all sorts of different social networking platforms right now, but I'm going to give you the example of the virtual world of Second Life, because I run a nonprofit and have for 5 years a community of a couple thousand nonprofits in Second Life. The 2 examples, which I'll tell very quickly, this can translate out of Second Life into Twitter, Facebook, etc., because these nonprofits were on all of the platforms. They were both volunteer-run nonprofits of 3 people. One was a horse rescue org, and one was a homelessness basically helping women transition out of addiction and homelessness into getting a job and getting a home, etc. They met because they found the right communities, the right networks, the right hashtags on social networks, and they formed collaborations. Both of these are separate instances under the umbrella of the Second Life community that I run, which is called nonprofitcommons.org. And they were able to get funds as a group. The homelessness organization met with 4 other homelessness organizations. One was in Canada, one was in LA, and they were able, aside from geographical limitations and budget limitations, they were able to connect and share best practices and eventually apply for a grant and get funded together as a partnership. And the horse rescue org was able to connect with the other horse rescue org and find out where the digital networks were for other horse rescue orgs. I mean, they basically just shared best practices. So you can, if you are alone and small, these tools, especially if you get in conversations that are larger, if you're listening to the right hashtags and all about that, I mean, I can tell you to go to janetfouts.com/listen, janetfouts.com/listen. She's a colleague, friend of mine, and is like the guru on social media listening. If you're listening, you can connect with people with great networks, the Beth Cantors of the world, and she's in the nonprofit tech sector, and she's got 500,000 Twitter followers, and we all learned from her. She kind of invented a lot of this stuff. So you can get to people with big networks. And similarly, you can serendipitously search these tags and find other tags that are related, widening your circle. So you can become discoverable by these communities. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And well, another approach to your question is, how do you reach a micro community? And if you're looking for a really small community, whether it's a few towns in Kansas, just like in the old world, you need to figure out who these people are and how to reach them, where they're spending their time. So you don't need a Twitter strategy if your target is not on Twitter. You need a communication strategy so you're reaching your target wherever they might be. Now, what social media allows is for you to reach micro communities, and the nature of social media is local. It's just a great way of connecting with local communities, and a great example is I live right nearby. There's an online news source, DNA Info, where they have a reporter who's covering the Upper West Side. So it's a very micro community, but I can follow reporter Leslie and find out what's happening in my neighborhood. And that's something that the old world just didn't allow because the costs of running a newspaper were prohibitive. But now you can reach micro-targeted communities, but it's not a matter of deciding I want to do it on Google Plus or I want to do it on whatever tool. It's a matter of talking to your target, understanding who they are, how they spend their lives, and where the best way is of reaching them. But chances are more and more people are spending their time on social media, and it becomes a very effective and easy way of reaching your target. But you have to do your homework and know how to get to them.
Yeah, I was just going to add quickly that, I mean, there's a lot of cause for optimism here. I think that a lot of the tools that get developed and the strategies at first require a lot of resources. So the work we were doing in '04 took, months, tens of thousands of dollars. There was no YouTube. We were making these sites manually. I was just down at Wall Street the other day. There's guys sitting there on laptops in the park doing something in 10 minutes, what took us months previously. And that's because, there are things like WordPress. There are a whole bunch of tools that I think the panelists have referred to, and, you've got to pick the right ones. But, just quickly on the tool thing, the single most effective tool we found for reaching out to people still remains email. So the social media platforms are fantastic, but, 9 out of 10 sign-ups for everything we've ever done has been somebody forwarding an email onto somebody else. Facebook still is kind of coming up. Twitter we find still is sort of lagging behind. I mean, its overall user base is still a fraction of what Facebook's is. And people tend to engage less deeply with the Twitter stream than they do with posts from their friends. So I think if you've got like a best practice website, you've got a place to sign up with email, and you've got a strategy for how to push really compelling content to them regularly and around specific events, like specific opportunities and crises and threats. That's kind of the 80% version that gets you most of the way there.
And just a quick point on that. I think your comment about Occupy Wall Street is incredible. If you're not following it and seeing the impact it's having, I strongly recommend you do. This is a small movement that started by what seemed like it might have been a fringe element, but it really tapped a nerve. It was able to get up and running with no mainstream media assistance, but it's a great example of reaching a micro community. In this case, because it tapped a nerve, it spread. It's 500 cities organizing on Meetup right now. And the same with the Tea Party on the other side. If you have an idea, you can reach like-minded people at no cost and use any of these tools to just build your community.
Any more questions? Oh, yeah.
No.
Actually, I would tend to disagree slightly. I mean, I think that in the space that I operate in, at least, the idea of a public-private partnership for sort of mutual gain is there. I mean, there's definitely corporations that are looking at their impact overall. I mean, yes, they care about profit, but they care about the footprint that they're leaving behind as they make the profit. So, I mean, if you look at the big corporations that, have the kind of the big machines, maybe you can find I think people have evolved from sort of marketing the fact that they're doing good to actually reorganizing the way they do business to create a sustainable future. And I don't know if you know of the work of B Labs, but they're actually measuring this, and they have a measurement system that's starting to look at organizations that are doing this. So if you're interested in learning about which corporations are focused on this, just look at B Lab's work and see which firms are coming up with top marks in their new. It's new the way they're measuring, but if you want to look at where you might get signals for corporations that are serious about it beyond the short-term view, I would start there.
And I actually have kind of a blended answer between yes and no. Because TechSoup is actually a hybrid. We are a social entrepreneurship and a nonprofit. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, but we make money because those corporations give us that software, and I said we pass the savings along or something like marketing but really we sell it to nonprofits for shipping and handling, which keeps our lights on and pays my salary and supports all the programs that don't make any money, because we have all these other programs that do good for nonprofits that don't make any money and are barely grant funded. So our sustainability model for TechSoup is 80% the product distribution program, which is where these corporations give us products and we sell them, and the other 20% is grants. So Microsoft is our biggest donor, and they've given us, they're like 75% of our catalog, and then we have a selection of other, I think we have like 70 nonprofit, we have 70 vendors, product donors, and Microsoft doesn't have any bigger of a flag on our partner page than a nonprofit partner like Lights Camera Help, who's one guy who's doing digital storytelling with me on that campaign. They are all equally represented. I mean, if you were to look in the catalog, you would notice that there's a lot more Microsoft products, but they aren't saying, hey, we are the reason that TechSoup exists. So, I mean, in a way, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Microsoft aren't as evil as everybody thinks they are. They're actually pretty cool.
Any more questions?
I want to expand on,
go ahead.
James wants to answer, and then I want to expand on my ingest, but go ahead,
Oh,
James.
sure. I mean, I was just going to say really quickly, we've had a really interesting experience working recently with a big European car manufacturer, and it's been an amazing opportunity for us because, we basically, these guys came in the door and, they wanted to talk about some social innovation work that they wanted to do. And we were originally kind of skeptical. We asked the same question you did, is this just about doing something you can sort of put your logo all over? And the guys that we were working with, and they were sort of ridiculously sort of senior. One guy was a board director at the global level, and the woman that reported to him, who was their global CMO, really liked that question, and that kind of indicated to them that we were serious about doing what they wanted to do, which was actually having some social impact. So you can kind of imagine that's probably the best case scenario for working with a brand where you've really got the highest, most senior level people genuinely committed, and honestly they were. You sort of take them out for drinks and this is what they're about. But even given that, you work with them, there's a massive institution underneath them, and we're cooking up all these great things. They're going to invest all this money in a whole bunch of really great social stuff that'll get launched in public soon, and we'll be able to talk about it at that point. But we're sitting down next Saturday, and we have to make the case to their, the US president. And the US president, he doesn't have the same values. He's not as interested. We have to make the business case to him, and then we start talking about the branding opportunities and the synergy with their, consumer base and how this is going to make their brand more valuable. And so I think that at the end of the day, these are institutions that act according to their institutional interests, and you kind of can't get away from that. But you can find actors internally sometimes that are going to want to work with you to find where there's some common interest between that institution and something good you want to do.
So obviously I was joking and saying no without explaining it. There's the one side, which is the Bruce Greenwald of corporations have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders, and corporate money is really shareholder money, And so it's not the responsibility of the corporation to give away that money. Their responsibility is to maximize profit for shareholders and let the shareholders do whatever they want. And if they want to give it away, they're welcome to, but it's not the corporation's role to give that away. That's one extreme of that viewpoint. The way you asked your question is somewhat simplistic in kind of implying that if a corporation is doing social good for any reason other than it being the right thing to do, it's evil, and they're doing it in a greedy way to further their for-profit business. And I see that as my view is that the way that corporations are going to be most successful is that they're going to be doing things that are beneficial both for the community and the corporation. And there's a lot of gray area. You could take Walmart. Walmart is having enormous impact by getting rid of iridescent light bulbs and switching to CFLs and LEDs. And are they doing that purely because it's in the world's best interest? Maybe yes, maybe no. Or do they generate a lot of great marketing benefit and a lot of goodwill by doing that? Undoubtedly. And is that a bad thing? And there's the same question about greenwashing and any other compromise situation where a corporation is doing something that does have social benefit, but it's also in the corporate's best interest. And my view is that, take the car company or take another example. If you're looking at a situation where a corporation is just writing a big check and not getting anything in return, it's not sustainable. And it might be something where you get an executive or you get a corporation that feels like it's the right thing to do. But ultimately, I think we as a society are better off if corporations are acting in their best interest when that is also in the best interest of the community. And it's a matter of getting corporations to realize that doing social good does benefit the corporation. And if they get their logo on it, all the better. I think that's something that makes it more sustainable and more likely to get other corporations, get that corporation to do it more and to get other corporations to follow suit.
And Richard, when you spoke earlier, you mentioned something about the public not trusting advertising or mass media. And so what I wanted to ask is, by using social media, is that a way to connect more directly with your constituency? Do you think that's a way to build trust, or is that more of a challenge to build trust? And maybe all of you could talk about that whole trust issue.
It's a great question. Nielsen came out with a statistic a month or so ago that 76% of people trust their own social networks more than any other source of information. So by and large, people see the media's deceived us. Corporate advertising, we're all savvy enough to know that corporations are able to run focus groups and figure out the exact way to position a message to the extent that it's just not credible, not believable. And so for a corporation to succeed in this new world, they have to, like you say, they have to build trust, and it's all a matter of credibility. And if you can be authentic and credible, then you can build that trust with your community. And there are companies that have done that, but it has to be sustained, and you have to keep that authenticity. And if you deviate from it, you lose it very quickly.
Does anybody else want to take that question, as to how it may relate to building trust with the nonprofit or more local communities?
I can briefly.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely can benefit a lot by listening. Again, I'm thinking about social media listening and just kind of listening in general to your brand and the tag cloud around your brand and your network. And you can build better trust if you're listening because you can engage and take on criticisms immediately versus what you think. Your customer base, your user base, your network is going to inform you of what your brand is better than you think that you know it. So you can, if you're a part of the conversation versus just broadcasting a message, but you're actually a part of a larger conversation surrounding your mission for us or your company brand, that what you do, then you'll become a better trustworthy member. And in terms of online community, not just social media, if you think about email lists, like welcome back to email lists. If you think about like LinkedIn groups or email lists, the people that you don't trust are the people that never participate, and they come in once a month to broadcast about them, and then they leave. But the people that you think are valued members of the community and they represent their organizations and the companies behind them are people that participate in other conversations that don't just have to deal with, this is our special right now, this is our campaign right now, but they actually participate, add value when it doesn't relate to them and their mission. And then occasionally when they come in and they actually do participate and talk about themselves, you're more interested and willing to go because you trust that they're a valuable member of community, not just a self-serving member of the community.
When I try to think about online communities sort of beyond the work that I do, for any nonprofit or social enterprise, I guess there's a bit of a tension because an online community is set up so that the participants in the community can craft the message. And when you're involved in a nonprofit or to further goals that your corporation or your donor agency or whatever has, you of course have what you want to do that you want to get out. So I think you have to, if your goal is to figure out what the requirements are of the members you're trying to reach, of the communities you're trying to reach, you have to sort of suspend your beliefs for a while and see what the community itself has to say. And then figure out how you can not only convene them around their needs, but then meet them and help them co-create the future with you. In the international development space, donors fall under a lot of criticism sometimes because they kind of make deals with governments and then come in and impose these changes on communities. And what social media does, or online communities, or even something as simple as email lists can do, or mobile phones, because in developing countries, mobile phones are more common than latrines or toilets. It actually gives voice to people who didn't have a voice. And the trick is then to listen and to be able to adapt to that voice in order to accomplish something. So I think it's great when social media can convene people. I think it's even better when that group has an action that they want to achieve. So actually the protests against Wall Street are amazing. If they actually had kind of an agenda, that would be even better. So I think that we have some examples on the panel of, media using technology to, further specific agendas, but just have to be careful. Is it the community's agenda or is it your agenda, and how can you balance those two and still use the tools effectively?
The idea of them not having an agenda is fascinating because they don't have a leader. And the New World movements that are leaderless, they're not top-down, don't necessarily have a specific agenda, which is both an advantage in that you can gather people together who are like-minded, but obviously a huge flaw that where are they going to go from here? And a lot of times, and I think the Tea Party is an example where the movement founded first and then they tried to piece together an agenda. But these tools can be more effective. They're definitely more effective in opposition than in governing. And I think that's something that President Obama has found, was that it was easy to use the tools to run against George W. Bush. It's a lot harder to use it sitting in the White House and being post-partisan and representing all Americans. And the same in Egypt, where people are able to use the tools to overthrow a government. But once you have to get to the nitty-gritty of governing and creating the agenda, it makes it a lot more difficult.
Well, that was their agenda, to actually overthrow the government. But I don't think we're in opposition. We're not in opposition here.
So I think if Occupy Wall Street's agenda is to change the system, they do have an agenda, which is to change the system. What they want to change it to, they don't have an agenda.
James, do you want to add something?
Yeah,
Since
I was
you
just
work
jumping
in
in.
political, and then we'll take another question.
Yeah, sure. I think you guys, Courtney and Richard, I think you're circling around the same thing, which is often I think communities come out of a shared set of values and identities, and it may be difficult at times to articulate what brings them together, and it may take a process of coalescing around various debates and discussions to get to that point. does that mean that, it's more difficult to drive to a particular outcome? Sometimes I think that's right, but the flip side of that often is that, you create this broader space, I think, that people can come together within. And I think part of the success of some of the groups that we've created has been exactly that. They've avoided often having explicit manifestos, because as soon as you lay out a 10 bullet point plan of exactly what you believe, someone's going to disagree with bullet point 8 and you've lost them. Rather, if you kind of express the more general feelings, you have a space that people can coalesce around. But yeah, I mean, there's a big limitation. I think when Obama, during the transition period, had probably more appetite for this kind of crowdsourced policy making. I remember they had this, I forget the name of the document, but they came up with a document that was a crowdsourced set of priorities that people were suggesting for the new government. And I think the thing that got to number 1 was legalising pot.
Yeah, definitely. I participated in that.
Yeah, and look, it's fascinating. It's great. And to their credit, they printed it. I mean, they kind of formatted it. They buried the pot thing sort of towards the end. If you looked at the numbers, it was kind of, that was the big one. Yeah, it's probably a good idea. But, so yeah, when you're democratic, you don't always control the agenda.
You had a question? Oh, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the question is basically how do we bridge the offline to online kind of, or online to offline, hopefully, divide. Yeah, I mean, I think if your aim is social change and you're trying to make some difference in the world and achieve some kind of social outcome, you definitely need to set as your aim to get real things happening in the real world. So I think that, if you're a campaign organisation, what that means is that any of your online campaigns have to very much have an engagement pathway that leads to something happening off the computer. So that might be an event, that might be convening something, that might be donating or joining something. I think that the strategies have to depend on exactly what your outcome is. But groups like Meetup and others that have found a bunch of ways that tools can be applied online to facilitate that process, I think kind of show that if that strategy is in place, the online tools give you a fantastic mechanism for broadening this pyramid of people that you can then actively try to push up to a higher level of engagement, which generally involves kind of shutting the laptop and going and doing something.
Another aspect of your question, though, is the digital divide, where you've got populations that don't have the same access to the internet or to mobile phones. And as more and more political power, consumer power, economic power is centered around having this connectivity, it becomes a massive problem, and it's something that needs to be addressed and fixed. And the more that can be done to get, whether it's minority communities or other communities, to be connected, it's absolutely essential. And fortunately, mobile phones have come a long way. They're very accessible. And there's the leapfrogging where a lot of minority communities don't necessarily have home computers, don't necessarily have broadband, but they do have mobile phones and actually are over-indexing in the use of the internet on mobile phones. But the digital divide is a massive problem that needs to be addressed.
Can I just I just want to kind of, I don't see that as a challenge. I see it as an opportunity, because content is, most people, like what you were talking about, that there are more mobile phones than there are latrines. In so many countries, I'm sure you already know this, that much more people access the internet through their phone than they do through a computer. And so just kind of optimizing mobile and making your content mobile friendly and shareable is going to create the action in the real world. It's not about they shouldn't be exclusive, and it shouldn't be like, oh, these things are only happening online. They're happening online so that they can be amplified outward. And I just wanted to say, with regard to, accessibility and digital divide stuff, it's very, well, I just said it, so I don't need to repeat myself. But basically, just that, it actually helps these movements further, because people who do have mobility issues, for example, are more able to connect with broader movements and share them out wider with their networks because of mobile and accessibility, like digital accessibility. And people who have budgetary, who wouldn't be able to fly and attend some sort of protest or do some sort of action, are able to share it out. So as long as you really focus on making your digital content shareable and mobile friendly, then it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, and just remember text. I mean, in the developing world, it's not even internet; it's SMSs. I mean, people do banking through it. People, small holders get prop information and commodity prices via SMS. I mean, so there are initiatives. So actually, in this country, we often think about internet, but in developing countries, you have to think about SMS. The whole world has access to SMS, but not to the internet. And maybe there's a challenge for us to think more about that in the U.S. as well. Not everybody has a smartphone.
We could probably take one last question. Any questions? You all kind of hit in what I was going to ask as the last question is, as technology evolves and changes, you mentioned mobile, how do you see technology, for example, look at all the changes in Facebook just over the past few weeks, how do you see that impacting your work, and what sort of where do you see the technology going? I think mobile is a really, thing to note as well, with being able to reach more people. But where do you see the technology going, and how is that going to impact your work?
I mean, cloud-based. It's about redundancy and cloud-based technology at this point, and that's where it's going to go. And there isn't so much of a worry of losing data, because everything is going to be backed up to the cloud, and that's a great opportunity. People don't have to have their own server anymore, and everybody can operate an organization through Google Apps, so that's a great opportunity. The challenge would be transparency. And for example, I just want to talk about very briefly the journey of a tweet. I mean, this was never a problem before, but at this point, because content is so shareable, there are a lot of ways which your own message can be taken, and the telephone game can happen, and it can be transmuted because of character count, and the implication could be something really bad. And there's also, that can also be an opportunity. It's just that your tweet can get turned into somebody's, not just a tweet, but the content on their website, which can turn into a blog and an art review and an opportunity for an interview and partnership, etc. So that's just those were the two kind of points that I would really kind of answer that with, is just cloud-based and the opportunity to share and broadcast further because of the social network and communications in that way.
Yeah, I think we should remember look at India, and they're distributing $130 tablets to their school children. If we look more to developing countries, there's going to be more different types of ways to connect, and that when people have a global mindset, they need to keep in mind all types of technologies. That's the only thing I should say. So regardless of the global trend, whereas everyone's going to the cloud for sure, but how they're connecting is going to diverge rather than converge into a particular type of device. So I just think we have to keep in mind the different ways, if your focus is global, that people are going to access each other.
So for me, I'm a lot less excited about what the specific tool is, whether it's MySpace or Facebook or Twitter or Google+. I think the capability is there, and that won't change. What will change is that a few years ago, the companies or the politicians who were the early adopters found it really easy to make their mark and to really stand out by using the tools. By now, and increasingly so, everyone sees they're out there and everyone knows they need to be there. And what it means is that it becomes extremely hard to get through. And we've gone from a world of scarcity where you were privileged to have your few TV channels and you'd get your daily newspaper, to now there's just no way of keeping up with this fire hose of information. And with this overabundance of data, it's going to be a massive challenge, whether you're the small local nonprofit or a corporation or a politician or just any organization, to get your message through. And one thing of the future is just better filtering, but as you have better filtering, it makes it harder for the small independent voice to get through. And so it's really a matter of tapping that nerve, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or a company, and being relevant and really tapping into your community so that they want to talk to you. And it's all of what we talked about. It's being authentic, and it's really being meaningful to your community in a way that, it's not getting your logo on there. It's being really meaningful so people want to talk about you and you can break through this massive amount of noise in this fire hose of information.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the trend, I guess, that excites me the most is really just, it's kind of banal, but it's like the cheapening, the commodification of all of these technologies. And I think that, that's leading to a couple of really big things. I mean, 2011 has been just an extraordinary year. We've seen entire governments toppled, this occupation has begun in Wall Street. There's been a whole bunch of exciting uprisings that have really, come about because there's a bit of a tipping point that I think we're getting to, where the technologies that, took a lot of investment and were really difficult to use, but everyone saw the power of them kind of 10 years ago, now have kind of become accessible enough that, broad segments of the population in developed countries and increasingly in developing countries, as the mobile phone penetration starts to kind of reach tipping points around the world, especially smartphone use. Countries like Brazil, incredibly widespread smartphone use, and we're doing some work down there. I think we could start to see some institutions and being threatened and some sources of power being created that really people aren't expecting. There was a great article in the New York Times about Bitcoin, the New Yorker last week, which is a fascinating example of how one guy used the sort of commodified cheap availability of computing to genuinely set up something that almost looked like a potential alternative to government central banks, a potential new currency that could thrive and exist by itself. Now that might be dreaming, but people would have said the same thing about the uprisings in the Arab Spring earlier this year as well. And I think all of it comes around because the accessibility is just so much greater now that I think there's a lot more ahead.
Well, thank you very much. We don't want to keep you from the reception, so thank you very much to the panelists, and enjoy the rest of your evening.